Welcome into another episode of the All Things Mizzou podcast presented by Missouri Tigers on SI. I'm one of your Missouri football reporters, Joey Van Zummeren, and I'm joined as always by my fellow reporter, Michael Stamps. Michael, how are you doing on another busy Tuesday for us?
It's college football, man. It's amazing. We got a better look last Saturday night at what the Tigers had to offer. Maybe a little bit more telling than a 51-0 win in Week 1 against a team that might not win a lot of games. So it was good to see that. It was just a generally pretty entertaining weekend of college football in general. There were some good matchups.
Good
One major
upsets.
upset. Yeah, one major
Yep.
upset that I wrote about on Sunday evening. So yeah, it was a good week of college football. Obviously, Missouri walked away with the win, which is always going to leave the city of Columbia in good spirits. So, and I think it's pretty evident that Missouri's looking at their not that we're far into the season at all, but definitely their biggest test through 3 weeks.
Yep.
So it'll be interesting to see how things go this Saturday morning. I have a feeling that people know it's going to be a good game, so should be a fun atmosphere, especially on a Saturday morning or afternoon, whatever you want to call it. So I think that's something to look forward to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you're talking about with the rest of the college football world, it feels like through these first 2 weeks at least, not everything is going in Mizzou's way. I mean, if everything had gone in Mizzou's way, USF would have also pulled off the upset on Alabama. Georgia would have lost too. But some of these upsets have really benefited Missouri. Obviously, they're not moving up from 11 to 9 to 6 in the polls because of their wins they've had. Obviously, if they got upset or lost either two of those games or didn't look as great, they would have moved down a few spots, moved out entirely of the poll, depending on how bad it was. But more than anything, the other teams are doing the work for them. And so at this point of the season, Missouri controls their own destiny. Obviously, some more factors going to be thrown into it when they face really tough teams in Alabama, really tough teams in Oklahoma. But as of right now, the goal is simple to win the season out, and then you're looking at you got a guaranteed spot in the playoffs. So more or less to say, they have to feel good with the spot they're ranked at now, and really, it's in their own hands, which is the most comfortable place you can be in. And so you were talking a little bit about, Michael, what we actually learned from this team this week, what we saw from the team. And I think the main takeaway for pretty much everybody is that this defense is legit. And again, we haven't seen them go up against a real challenger. We've seen them go up against FCS team and a MAC team that could not generate anything on offense. However, you look at some of the just take away the talent they're going against. You see the speed of Corey Flagg, the strength of Corey Flagg. You see the lockdown coverage of Drayden Norwood, his backstep. You see Toriano Pride jumping out of passes and making plays. You see Zion Young coming through with some incredible power on his bull rushes on so many plays throughout both games so far. You see Chris McClellan really making an impact. So talent on the opposition removed from this. There has been some really promising signs from the Missouri defense so far in this season. Mike, what have your thoughts been on this really talented group?
Man, I have to say, as someone who loves the NFL draft and likes the process and likes watching players and giving them my own personal grades, I think Zion Young is going to be an incredible player. He has shown some stuff, and I wrote about this earlier in the week as well. It maybe hasn't showed up on the stat sheet. I think he had 4 tackles and a pressure on Saturday against Buffalo, but he's done so much. We obviously look back to the Murray State game. He was the guy who brought the pressure on Jaden Johansson that led to the Toriano Pride interception. But even outside of the stat sheet, kind of like you mentioned, bull rushes, just general pass rush moves in general. I think he looks so good. He has some time here as well, so he's going to be fun to watch him develop. But you really hit the main points. I think an interesting thing, and we're going to talk about penalties here in a moment on the offensive side of the ball. How efficient has this defense been? It really seems like they're not making many mistakes at all. They're not allowing many chunk plays, big plays at all, things like that. I was just looking it up a little bit before this. I think they've allowed around 250 total yards of offense between Buffalo and Murray State, which again, even if you're looking at a lower level of competition, that's still ridiculously impressive. You look at, an Alabama team, like you mentioned. I'm not saying USF is good or bad. I don't know much about South Florida, but that was a little more competitive than they probably would have liked. There's teams who are in the top 10 who are struggling a little bit defensively against teams they should be beating pretty handily. You look at Oregon and Idaho in week 1, that's another good example. So I think the fact that they've been able to handle business defensively as easy as they have, I mean, I've never once thought, wow, this team's going to score um, through the first 8 quarters of football that they've played. So it's really impressive. It doesn't seem like they have any flaws yet. That's going to change probably against Boston College. I would expect Boston College to score. Um, if they don't, I would be even more impressed than I have been already. It's been a really fun group to watch, and um, not that I'm surprised that they've been as good as they have. But I think the general consensus coming into the year was that this offense was going to dominate. Luther Burden was going to dominate. Split committee running back room. They're going to punish people on the ground. Brady Cook's going to sling the ball all over the place. Hasn't necessarily been the case yet, and that's due to a lot of factors. They probably haven't been as sharp as they could have been. Playbook might not be as open as it possibly could be. They're still getting their feet on the ground, but the defense, I mean, they really haven't missed a beat. No penalties. Is that correct? No defensive penalties yet?
Let me double check on that, but I
I
know at the very least the offense has the main share of those.
Yeah, absolutely. Off the top of my head, I can't remember any defensive penalties, but if there have been, it's been very limited. You talk about guys in coverage; they haven't been too handsy, no pass interferences, things like that. So that's one thing that really stands out, and that might be more of the offense has struggled in that area than the defense. But there's so much talent over the roster. We've seen young guys get in. Drinkwitz, head coach Drinkwitz, mentioned earlier today that he's loved what he's seen from Cam Keys and Jaron Sensabaugh at the cornerback position in both spring, fall, and practice in general, and limited time on the field. Guys like Will Nwaneri and Jalen Brown and Elias Williams are all getting on the field. So freshmen are playing, and they're making the best of their snaps. It's just loaded. It's loaded full of talent, and the experienced guys are showing that as well. You made a great point about the power and athleticism of Corey Flagg. He looks, I believe, he's leading the team in tackles right now. So he's been impressive as well. So all around impressive. I'm not going to go out and say they're going to struggle against Boston College. I mean, there's no predicting that. It's going to be the biggest test. It's probably going to be Boston College's biggest test as well. So it's going to be an interesting thing to see for both sides.
You're right on both stats. You mentioned their defense has 0 penalties on the year so far, and Corey Flagg leads the team with 8 tackles. And I find it particularly interesting. 8 tackles. Assuming Pro Football Focus is including all tackles in that, solo assists as well. So the fact that the leading tackler only has 8 tackles, I mean, Eli mentioned last week the fact that Corey Flagg was their leading tackler in the Murray State game, and he doesn't even play on 3rd downs. I think that really shows you, I mean, one, not only that Corey Flagg, who is a specialty player, you could say, is leading the team in tackles, but also the fact that it's 8, and there's been no shortage of plays for this defense. There's been more opportunities, but the fact that this it's so spread out really shows the depth of this defense, which I think is really going to be the thing that takes it very far. And not only for keeping guys fresh, but I really like how Drinkwitz faced this today in his press conference. And it was what I was trying to articulate last week of there is no real, I mean, of course there is backups compared to starters on this team, but there's really 18, 19, 20 starters on this defense. That's just a estimation, a random number. I haven't gone through the full clarification for every player on that, but there is, when Nick DeLoach is coming in for Toriano Pride, he's not a backup. When Zion Young, Eddie Kelly, Johnny Walker Jr., Joe Moore, when they're all rotating, none of them are backups. Drinkwitz referenced Gus Malzahn today and saying this guy is better at this guy is better at that, this guy is better at X, Y, and Z compared to this guy. And it's kind of what I asked him last week of just the ability to only put guys in positions where they will succeed, not try to fit any square pegs and round holes to where their defense can operate at a really high level. I'm trying to think of what else you mentioned in that, Michael. But overall, you can't have any complaints about this defense. Like you said, there's never been a drive so far in these two games where it's like, oh boy, maybe this is the point where they get gassed. And again, depth plays a big part of that. They have a lot of guys that can play in a variety of roles. So got to be impressed with this defense so far. And like you mentioned too, to round it off, Boston College is going to be a tough challenge for them, and we'll get a better look to see just how real this defense is.
One point I want to bring up before we move on, we talked about CJ Agbana a lot last week. I think Coach Drinkwitz mentioned him multiple times that he was going to be a threat on the ground. I think the general consensus and on with other reporters and social media was that Agbana was going to be the biggest threat on that Buffalo offense, and he quite literally did nothing. I mean, he was 6 of 20 on the air, only ran for 19 yards on 8 carries, which isn't a low amount necessarily. So I think that also speaks, and I don't know what CJ Agbana is going to do this year. We know what he's capable of doing on the ground. He did it to Missouri a couple years ago. He's more than capable of lighting a defense up on primarily in the running game. And I think it speaks in the growth and development of this defense over the last couple of years where they were in 2021. Obviously, they handled that game easily, but he still had almost 100 rushing yards. He only had 19 this time around. So the fact that they were able to contain him, as honestly, it was easy. I mean, going back to that, I never felt like, oh, he's going to break off a huge run. Even when he got to the outside, there was always someone there. And I think that should give fans and the team some, not necessarily hope, but the idea that, we can contain a guy like Thomas Castellanos, who we're going to get to here eventually. So the fact that was never really a major issue or threat was also another really good sign of growth and development and the talent on this defense.
Yeah, absolutely. The mobile quarterback thing, our colleague Quentin Corpiel asked Drinkwitz if there was any lessons from the game against LSU last year where Jaden Daniels runs for just an absurd amount of runs on the Mizzou defense. And we talked about this game last week, and I brought it up with Daniels and the really good mobile quarterbacks like Thomas Castellanos they're not going to kill you on design runs. They're not going to kill you on read options, anything like that. It's just scrambling, especially on third down. Drinkwitz mentioned specifically a third down backed up against their own end zone that LSU had in the fourth quarter. That if Mizzou gets on a stop on it, Mizzou is leading 32-27, 10 minutes left in this game. Jaden Daniels is taking the snap back at the 8-yard line. And, nobody is open for him. Joe Moore breaks off of the right tackle here. And, Jaden Daniels steps up right before Joe Moore is able to get his hands on him. So that would have been a big game-changing play if Moore was able to bring him down and get the hands back in the ball, or ball back in the hands of the Missouri offense. And so with Castellanos, we're going to talk about him, like you mentioned, a little bit here. But, looking at what the Mizzou defense did in this game against Buffalo, we talked going into it of, we're going to be able to get a look at what their plan is going to be for Boston College and then also Diego Pavia at Vanderbilt. But all that Buffalo did was design runs. I can't remember an instance where CJ Agbana tuck it down and ran. And part of that, Drinkwitz was talking about Castellanos today and saying that he this year especially, he's getting a lot more freedom to just be in the pocket, make the decisions for himself, when to tuck it and run it, when to throw it. And so that's going to be a different challenge this week. Looking at what they did against CJ Agbana, it was not as much Khalil Jacobs as I was expecting in efforts to stop Agbana. It was mostly Chuck Hicks and then Corey Flagg. Corey Flagg can cover a lot of space quickly, and then Chuck Hicks just a really sound tackler. So again, not as much as we thought we'd learn about how this team plans to handle mobile quarterbacks. So this week will be the week that we'll find that out, except this week it's not as much opportunity to really test it out. This is the real deal. One of the only two ranked matchups for the weekend. The only ranked matchup of Saturday, Arizona and Kansas State play on Friday night. That should be a good game. Also, the only team in the top 10 playing a ranked team. So, again, a really good opportunity. The teams in the top 5 just seem at such another level. It seems hard to see Mizzou unless they really go out there and beat Boston College in dominating fashion. Hard to see them moving up too many spots in the polls, but a great opportunity to get a ranked win early in the season. Sticking on this game against Buffalo before we fully turn the page to Boston College, there was a few injuries in this game. I was watching the broadcast, and it felt like every other drive I was paying attention to a guy who got injured. And so the big one being Luther Burden. And I think we were one of the first people on that, if not the first, even before the SEC network got that. Our photographer, Matt Guzman, was down on the field and saw Luther walking into the tunnel with a towel over his head, got that out immediately. And turns out it was just an illness, which was very odd to find out from the commentators when they were getting back from the halftime break. It's like, what do you mean? He played the entire first quarter, most of the second, and now suddenly he feels too sick to play. Like he caught a cold during the game and it's already getting to him. Like, what's the deal with that? But was dealing with the illness all week leading up to the game. I don't know what illness it is, but considering that he was dealing with it midweek last week, he was out there practicing today, even played a little bit in the game Saturday. I would expect him to be out there. Theo Weiss, he suffered, I don't want to speculate, but he was walking off to the sideline holding his kind of shoulder after he made a catch against Buffalo in the third quarter. He returned to the game, obviously. Drinkwitz said today that both Luther and Theo would be probable if he had to file an injury report today, being Tuesday. Cameron Johnson, who missed the game with a injury, would be questionable, I believe Drinkwitz said. So he missed that game. Mitch Walters stepped in for him. Mitch Walters, we found out tonight from Drinkwitz on Tiger Talk, is dealing with an ankle injury. So I would expect if Walters needs to step back in there, he will be fine, though. But I'd also not be surprised if Johnson just plays in the game because, as we heard from Drinkwitz right after the game, the Johnson could have played if it was the national championship or any meaningful game. But, they were able to slide Walters in there. And then Brett Norfleet, who missed the last game with a shoulder injury that he suffered against Murray State, would be questionable as well, according to Drinkwitz. So all those injuries are definitely something to monitor. It's difficult, at least right now, with it not being an SEC game. Finally, next week, we'll be able to get our daily injury reports, which I am extremely excited for. As far as practice today, Luther was out there. Theo Weiss was in a green jersey. Brett Norfleet was in a green jersey. And let's see. But Cameron Johnson was out there in his normal jersey. Green jersey means you can the players are not supposed to contact them. So that's that practice report. Again, it's so difficult. We're still 4 days out from the game as we're recording this to say too much about those. Obviously, especially in this game, to not have either one of Luther, Theo, or Norfleet, especially, would not be ideal. But this team obviously has enough depth at the pass catcher position where they would be able to recover. So that's our injury news. Michael, any thoughts on those injuries before we turn it to the Eagles?
I mean, no. The only thing I'll really add to that is it's probably the point in the season heading into the hardest matchup of the year. This isn't a FCS team. This isn't a random group of 5 team. This is a top 25 ACC program. So my personal opinion, it's probably getting past that precautionary phase. You don't want to take any chances. And don't get me wrong, you don't want to take any chances as far as re-aggravating an injury or making something worse, but you also don't want to take any chances and risk losing a game or making a game closer than it is because you're being too
Yeah.
careful with the player. It's a really hard decision to make. That's why I'm not a head coach. It's obviously going to be up to them, and we're gonna trust their judgment, and so will the fans. Um, I would be shocked to not see Luther Burden play and to not see Theo Weiss play, especially Weiss. The fact that he was able to go back out and continue to, um, you know, do his thing out there, I wouldn't be too concerned about him unless it's really still bothering him. Cameron Johnson was, I mean, obviously Luther Burden was a surprise. I don't think anyone really had any indicator that he was under the weather. Cameron Johnson was also a bit of a surprise, at least to me. Seeing him on, he was suited up, but obviously didn't play. So that was kind of a surprise as well. But if you really, in the grand scheme of things, you look at the offense as a whole, those are four, even five, including Mitch Walters. But the main four, those are four starting, very extremely impactful players that you really don't want to be without. So that might give some reason to be precautious, especially heading into SEC play when it's only going to get more challenging. Nothing against Boston College, but SEC play is kind of a different level, and the Missouri is going to hit the road for the first time, which is different than playing behind your home fans. So I would understand if they're careful with a guy like Cameron Johnson and Brett Norfleet, where we don't necessarily know a ton about, and there may be more like bone injuries or ankle joints, things like that. Weiss was able to get back in the game. I would expect him to be suited up, and I would imagine Luther Burden's going to want to play against a top 25 program. So that's all speculation. We're not going to know anything, I'd imagine, unless we hear anything over the next couple of days or until we see the depth chart pregame. So, I mean, obviously, we hope they're okay and would like them to be in the game, but you got to understand the precautionary side of that as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we found out on, I believe it was Wednesday or Thursday of last week from Pete Thamel that Brett Norfleet would not be playing the game. So I guess be on the lookout for those in the next few days. And on that note, you saw Jordan Harris. He was announced as the starter pregame with Norfleet out. He and Tyler Stevens kind of split time, which we originally expected. So, I mean, looking at Jordan Harris, at least he was mainly the blocking guy in there, and he looked really powerful, really strong in that game. So I'm sure Mizzou has trusted him. And I mean, kind of on that note too, it was interesting to see kind of the motions he went on. It really felt like even if the deep passing game still wasn't clicking, just because Mizzou wasn't trying this, Buffalo was playing so much off coverage. Their cornerbacks were lined up all the way in St. Joe, Missouri, where the offense was really just relying on the short passing game, relying on their guys to get yards after the catch. And Theo Weiss obviously took advantage of that. So outside of that part, though, with the motions they had going, there's one play where Brady tosses it back to Noel that has like 3 triple motions involved in it. A lot of that stuff going on. So it does feel like Kirby Moore is getting to his bag a little bit more, and I feel like this week will be the full unleashing of that. I'm sure they're going to have a lot more preparation, a lot more playbook study, because after this, there's no break. Obviously, the bye weeks, but as far as opponent-wise, until they have a little break traveling to UMass on October 12th. But other than that, they're full-on SEC after that, where every game becomes incredibly important. So that's that. I mean, this offense, I guess we could talk about the offense too a little bit. I mean, you kind of hit on it a little bit, Michael, at the top with the expectations compared to reality for which side would be the dominant side for Mizzou football in this season. And the offense, it hasn't been bad per se. It's just been odd to see the difference between this year compared to last year. I mean, watching last year's team and then considering the expected growth of Marquise Johnson, Joshua Manning possibly getting more involved, Theo Weiss as well, Brett Norfleet becoming more involved as well, you'd expect them to really air it out And that has not been the case. Part of it has been, in week one against Murray State, they attempted more of those. Brady Cook couldn't hit on them, overthrowing them. Then this week, they just simply did not attempt many of those passes. And I don't know. We don't have access to the all 22, obviously. So I'm just rewatching the broadcast film. So we can't see what the deep routes are looking like, what the safety coverage is looking like. And obviously, how Buffalo played in coverage a little bit dictated that as well. But they just weren't attempting many deep passes in this game. And so it's kind of been a different form, and we'll see how long that sticks. But Drink was talking today about what Buffalo did and what Murray State did as well. This defenses are really scared of this wide receiving core, how how deep that room is, and their ability not only with the deep threats, but also with Luther Burden. You want to have guys, you want to have a host of guys that are far back enough to where they can chase them down after the catch. So it's a challenge, and kind of what I was talking about preseason. They can really attack you at all levels. Nate Noel is a really talented receiver out of the backfield. You got Brett Norfleet who can do some of the shorter stuff as well, and is going to draw attention from your inside linebackers. You got Theo Weiss, Marquise Johnson, Joshua Mannion, like I mentioned, as deep threats. And then you got Luther Burden, Mookie Cooper, who can really attack the middle of the field and create space for themselves. So I don't know how you would game plan for the Missouri wide receiving core, but as of now, this offense has been efficient. The stats will tell you this offense has been really efficient, has got the job done, except in the first quarter against Buffalo. But there haven't been any big flashy plays, and Drinkwitz talked about it again, of having to be disciplined, taking what the defense gives you, and being patient with it. So it will be interesting to see. Maybe this Mizzou offense takes on a new identity this season, or could just be a first 2 weeks thing, and once Brady gets hitting on all strides again on the deep passes, then we'll see the same fireworks that we saw last year from this Mizzou offense. But I mean, Michael, what has been your thoughts on this Mizzou offense so far this season?
Something interesting to think about. I look at Missouri's week one game where there was a lot of distribution of wealth in the receiving game, a lot of very even. It was very even receiving wise. Just comparing like early season draft stock and kind of consensus receivers. Obviously, Luther Burden is a name you hear thrown out there, but Tetterell McMillan, Arizona's wide receiver. I don't know the numbers on Burden's first game. It was not anything super significant. Not a bad game by any means, but Brady Cook just found a lot of different targets. Probably, I think it was double-digit targets. McMillan had 304 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns in their week one just blowout of New Mexico. 10 receptions too. I think this is more of a fanfare thing where people were looking for Burden to just have a crazy game and really show off his skill set. So that's part of it. Other part of it is Cook is a quarterback who I think does an excellent job of reading defenses. He's not going to throw a deep ball just to throw a deep ball. He 1000% did an excellent job of taking what was given to him against Buffalo, and they were sagging off 10 or 12 yards. He found his receivers nice and early on the outside, quick little 5-10 yard hitch routes, things like that, little out routes, quick receptions, get out of bounds, or get your receivers the ball and make a play. I mean, that's really, I think, what this receiving core's bread and butter is. Burden, Marquise Johnson, Daniel Blood, Mookie Cooper, Mekhi Miller. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of playmakers, even Manning and Weiss, who, you kind of view as your bigger, more possession, big target receivers. Even they can make plays. Weiss did an excellent job after the catch against Buffalo. So that's kind of the name of the game for this receiving core is, get them the ball and let them make a play. Not to say they're not route runners, because they are. Burden is an excellent route runner. I don't think I need to tell anyone that. Excuse me. They're only going to need to, really pull that out of their bag when it's necessary. And honestly, it just wasn't necessary against Buffalo. They didn't have to do it. You look at some of the deep balls against Murray State, and I think that was kind of a complaint, if you want to say that. That it could also just be week one, ironing the kinks out, just trying to establish herself. Probably a lot of adrenaline. Brady Cook maybe gets a little too excited and overthrows a couple passes. It is what it is. He did it last year, so I don't think anyone should be overly concerned about finding those guys as long as they can get open. I think he's going to be able to find them. But it goes back to what I've been saying. Majority of this show and last week as well, even that Boston College is going to be the biggest test. And I don't imagine they're going to sag 10 to 12 yards off these receivers. Clearly, that didn't work all that well for Buffalo. So I think they're going to have some more deep ball threats, and it's going to be interesting to see if Cook and his receivers can connect.
What you mentioned about this offense being based on really just getting the stars touches, that was exactly what they talked about on the podcast. They had talked to Kirby Moore, and Moore had talked about forced touches for their key playmakers, which I think I had such an adverse reaction to that at first, just because of my mind being NFL centric, being like, no, you never want to force balls to your starters. That's how you end up making your quarterback make dumb decisions. He's not looking for anybody else. And I think it's not necessarily where Brady Cook goes into a play. Luther Burden is his A option, and he's exclusively looking at Luther Burden. But I think it's an effort to more so draw plays, call those plays that are really designed specifically. We're going to get Luther Burden in space. We're going to get Nate Noel out of the backfield. We're going to get Theo Weiss on a really good deep post here, which I find interesting. Again, like you said, it's really just letting these, as much as Brady Cook can do, getting the balls in these guys' hands and seeing where they take it, because a lot of them have shown the ability to be incredible playmakers with it. Moving on to this Boston College game, we're going to have a deeper preview later this week with Kim Rankin, who covers Boston College for Boston College on SI. Going to have some great insight there, I'm sure. But Michael, what can you tell the folks about this Boston College team? Obviously, their quarterback and their head coach are the big star of it, but talented team otherwise too.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything crazy. Kim definitely knows more than the both of us combined. Thomas Castellanos, we touched on him last week. He's incredible, really. Again, as a guy who loves the draft process, it's kind of hard to see how he won't somehow carve out a role in the future. He is ridiculously fast. He's not an overly large quarterback at all. He is 5'9", 196 according to ESPN. I think if you watch his film from the first 2 weeks in last season, and Drinkwitz mentioned today a Scott Van Pelt quote that compared him to Kyler Murray. I think we were talking about it a little bit earlier today. That's something I kind of saw in him as well. Just his ability to drop back, and he is a split-second decision maker on whether he's going to air it out or take off. And if he takes off, it's one of those things that you better hope you can catch him, because he has the speed and the shiftiness to carve out a significant amount of yards on a single run. I wouldn't expect too many quarter designed runs. Drinkwitz touched on that as well today. That they probably have those in their arsenal, but they haven't had to use them much because he just reads defenses so well, like Cook, but in a different aspect, if that makes sense. He reads defenses so well on whether he should take off or whether he should do something in the air, which is where he's carved out more of a role passing wise. He's 340 yards and 6 touchdowns, no interceptions, which is kind of an interesting stat. Only 81 rushing yards on 15 rushing attempts. So stats aren't obviously anything super insane through the first 2 weeks, but if you go back and watch last year and what he's done this year, he's definitely capable. They have some receiving threats. They like to find one of their running backs, Trayshawn Ward, out of the backfield. Lewis Bond is their leading receiver so far, and he only has 6 receptions, but 105 receiving yards. So obviously he's a dynamic playmaker of sorts. Drinkwitz mentioned today Vanderbilt transfer Jaden McGowan, who I do remember from last year and following his recruiting process, because he was a pretty highly touted recruit. He is only a return man, which I found interesting. He's only doing kick and punt returns. So obviously that's going to be someone to monitor on special teams when when it comes to the return game, but I don't think I'd expect him to be too much of a threat in the passing game, which surprised me slightly. But um, there's that. On defense, their defensive ends Nito Akpala and Donovan Iziraku. That's a tough one. Maybe Kim can help us out there. I mentioned him last week, and I really found him to be impressive just with his pass rush moves. Nito Akpala has been around the Boston College defensive unit for quite some time, so I would if I'm Marcus Bryant and Armand Membo, I'm making sure that they don't get to the quarterback, because those are guys that will absolutely wreak havoc if they get to the quarterback. I can't remember which player, might have been Drinkwitz, mentioned that there's NFL talent on that defensive line. So keep an eye out for them. And yeah, that's really all that comes to mind. They have Sedarius McConnell. He's a transfer on the defensive line that is pretty solid. They have talent. They brought in some nice transfers. I mentioned McConnell. Jaron Bradley is a 6'5" receiver transfer from Texas Tech. He has 1 reception this year, so he's an interesting size and build for a receiver. I don't know if they shift him into any tight end stuff at all, but he's gonna be a threat of sorts. They mentioned that they have a lot of converted safeties to the linebacker position, so that obviously provides for some versatility as far as playing in the middle of the field and coverages and things like that. I noticed that against Florida State, they had a lot of linebackers playing pretty well in coverage. One of them either had an interception or a deflection or a bat down. So they seem pretty well balanced from what I've watched so far in their first 2 games. I mean, they blew out Duquesne. I don't think that was really a surprise to anyone. I should mention the running back room as well of Kai Robichaud and Treshaun Ward. Missouri saw Treshaun Ward last year when he was with Kansas State. This is his 6th year of college football, so he's been around a time or two. I should mention Turbo Richard. He's our true freshman running back, one, because his name is just incredible. I mean, his recruiting profile name was Turbo, and his name is Turbo on the roster.
It's a name or running back as Kenneth.
Honestly, yeah, right. So Turbo Richard was their leading rusher. Now I would imagine they didn't go. It looks like they didn't really bring out Robichaud and Ward as much as they could have last week, but they used Jordan McDonald a little bit. He's a transfer from UCF, so that running back room is pretty dynamic. And like I mentioned, Ward gets heavily involved in the pass game. He's their second leading receiver. So that's going to be I think a name, and his name was thrown around today in today's press conference. That's going to be a guy that you really have to make sure he doesn't escape too far. And then Robichaud is more of a bruiser, almost like it's similar to a Noel Carroll situation. I think Carroll's a little more versatile, but Robichaud loves those dives up the middle, and if his offensive line gets behind him, man, it's hard to stop him. So long story short about my rant on Boston College is they have a lot of weapons on both sides of the ball, more than anyone the Tigers have seen combined so far. I think it's interesting. Castellanos has done pretty well in the air, but I don't necessarily see the most eye-opening receiving core. Now that's early on, and obviously, comparing it to Missouri is probably not a fair comparison, but obviously he's been able to do it. I don't know if that speaks more to the receiving room or Castellanos' ability to find his receivers. But he's going to be the focus of the defensive preparation, whether that's stopping him in the air or keeping him, in the box and not letting him get past the line of scrimmage. If he does, escape the pocket and, start moving down the field, that's danger territory.
Absolutely. Like I said, well-balanced team. quarterback is a star, but they got talented ends. I mean, they're two offensive tackles, really talented players that are going to be, I'd imagine, much tougher challenges for. I mean, Zion Young and Johnny Walker specifically have just. There's been some plays where within a half second they're past their guys mostly because of their hand placement has been really good. Their handwork has been really good. But also, I mean, sometimes they just overpower them. Johnny Walker said or I believe it was Zion Young who said on the interception that he caused for Toriano Pride that he saw the guard and the center have a miscommunication. Or that was Chris McClellan on the forced fumble that he had. So going to be a tougher challenge for them on the offensive line for sure and all around. So we've been harping on, Michael, going to be a really good test to see what is really what this Missouri team is really about. So Missouri faces off against Boston College on this Saturday at 11:45. Going to be an early morning for everybody, but should be a fun one for sure. Like I said, we'll have Kim Rankin on later this week to get a full preview on this Boston College team. So make sure you tune into that and all the other coverage we have here on Missouri on SI. And we thank you for tuning in today.